Our keynote speaker for today is Dr. R S Sharma. Really needs no introduction. I'll do a brief one in any case. Dr. Sharma was until recently the chairperson of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI. Before that, he served as Director-General UIDAI, Secretary in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and Chief Secretary to the Government of Jharkhand. So he's really had a ringside view to the development of IT infrastructure in India and how it has been played out at a national scale. Dr. Sharma holds an MSc in Mathematics from IIT Kanpur, an MS in Computer Science from UC Riverside, and a PhD in Management and Public Policy from IIT Delhi. His book, The Making of Aadhar, was recently published. Let me also take this chance to congratulate you on that again, sir. And we are absolutely delighted to have him with us to share lessons from this rich experience in running major e-governance reforms in India. Over to you, Dr. Sharma, if you could unmute yourself, please. Dr. Sharma, you're still on mute, sir.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Please.
Just a minute. Yeah, so thank you, Amia, for that introduction. I was hearing to Viraj's welcome address and the journey which eGov Foundation has sort of gone from starting the systems in the initial phases and now going on to really keeping ahead on the technology curve and sort of developing solutions which satisfy the requirements of current requirements of interoperability, open standards, open APIs, and stuff like that. So I've been told to kind of talk about building public digital goods, the experience from Aadhaar. So I'll focus on the broad principles which one can get out of the project which we did, and how these principles have subsequently been applied in various other sort of domains. I will not talk about the urban governance, though I have some experience of doing that as the Secretary of IT in my state in Jharkhand, where we did kind of Ranchi Municipal Corporation. We were actually implementing a number of initiatives like taxation, water supply, sewage systems, and other things. But that was about 15 years back. So that will probably not be relevant today. And of course, Ranchi may be now implementing solutions which are of a national scale and which are extremely sort of developed in terms of new technologies like Internet of Things, the sensor technologies, and other things. Let me start by saying that Aadhaar actually came, sort of Aadhaar project was started after a lot of deliberation in the government, and actually the problem which the government at that point in time or before that faced were twofold. One is that the lack of identity, which lack of a verifiable identity in India was a big obstacle to accessing various formal systems. Because as you know, any formal system, the first question it is going to ask you, who are you? And can you prove that you are who you claim to be? That's the first question which anybody asks before they authorize you, or authentication and authorization, So basically that was one part. And second issue was, from the government's perspective, there were a lot of duplicates and fakes in various beneficiary-oriented programs. So for example, in PDS, in some of the states, the number of PDS cards were more than 30% more than the number of families in that state, which obviously meant that there were a lot of duplicates and a lot of ghosts, and therefore the subsidy was getting mismanaged or misused by certain elements. And obviously there was a incentive to game the system. So this was the context in which the Aadhaar program was started. And the challenge was given to us was to create unique identities for 1.2 billion people. Now, it was that particular part had never been attempted anywhere in the world to create unique identities or to ensure uniqueness at such a large scale of population. So one problem which we faced was the technology problem, which is essentially how do you solve that issue. And the second problem, of course, in the beginning itself came about the issues related to privacy, surveillance, and other issues. So while we could deal with technology problem, by doing a lot of pilots and using the biometrics and biometrics for the first time in the whole history of the world, where biometrics have not been used for developmental projects, we did that. That was one part which we solved, and fortunately we were able to create technology backend to ensure that we were able to process the data and to ensure uniqueness, and we used 10 fingerprints and 2 sort of iris images. We were actually quite we struggled quite a lot in solving the other issue, and in fact we could not solve the other issue of people sort of concerned about the privacy, security, safety, etc. of the data. So that's a separate topic altogether, and I have dealt with that topic in my book. But what I want to discuss is essentially what are the design principles which were actually adopted in Aadhaar, and which are quite relevant to all the projects which Viraj talked about and all the other projects in other domains. So some of these principles were, one was we created a foundational identity, a foundational digital identity, which means that we did not create an identity for a purpose. We created identity as an attribute, as a product itself. And why did we do that? Is that we realized that every domain requires this particular component of proving who you are, proving that you are you. That part is a common problem of all the domains. So we thought that if we could solve the common problem, that will be the maximum sort of return on investment of our investment, because that problem the solution of that problem will actually absolve all the domains from doing that. So for example, if you want to go to the bank and open a bank account, and if you can just give this identity, verifiable identity, then the bank account opening problem becomes much more simpler. Similarly, you want to get a mobile SIM, or there are multiple, ration, etc. So that's one part. So we solved that problem, and this was the world's first identity which was without eligibility, which means that we did not put any eligibility. In fact, so much so that even citizenship was not a part of this identity, only residence was a part of the identity. Then, of course, another principle was cost effective, because any solution in our country has got to be cost effective. The UK's IT cards required 135 pounds per ID card. Of course, that was shelved later on, but by that logic, and we actually spent just about $1 per identity. So that's the another part, because we have to have cost effective. We are not a very rich country. Similarly, another part, we said it should be a plug and play, which means that it should be a truly digital identity. And for that to be a digital identity, we said there should be no token. There should be no smart cards. There should be no smart token. And it's not required in a connected world. So actually, it's a truly digitally connected identity on the cloud. And by doing that, you are able to plug that identity into any domain. Why? Because at any point in time, you can just get that identity information from the cloud, and you can use it wherever you want to use it. So that's another part. Then, of course, it has to be interoperable. It has to be inclusive, which means that everybody has to get an identity. There are people who do not have any paper to prove who they are, but they also have to have the identity document. So if you make the process so strict that you bring some documents to prove your identity or to get an identity, then it's a circular problem. Then those who don't have an identity will never get an identity. So basically, that's another part. Other principle, and actually I'm running through these lists because there's only a 15 minutes of time, and I'm aware of that constraint. So another was open source. The Aadhaar system, we did not use any proprietary kind of technology, except the one where we did not have an open source parallel available. So for example, biometric deduplication was the only technology which was actually proprietary, and we had to engage biometric deduplication agencies. Otherwise, everything was on open source, and it was based on open standards. Obviously, it was scalable because scalability was essentially required, because you want to do 1.2 billion, you should do it fast enough, and you should be able to, there are many algorithms which actually work at a lower level, but which do not work at a higher speed, at a higher numbers, so to say. The input size actually increases the complexity of algorithm. And of course, it has to be speedy, because you can't keep on doing it. So we had to do it even at a rate of 1 million per day. 1.3 billion requires 1300 working days. So basically that requires 5 years. And actually we scaled up to 5.5, we scaled up to 1 billion in 5.5 years. So this is basically the design principles of the Aadhaar. We also designed for safety and security. We incorporated what is called privacy by design in the model. We also had federated data model, which means that Aadhaar will not keep any information. And by the way, I must also add here that while the UID Authority of India was given a mandate only to generate a unique identity for our population, we provided a service called authentication service, because we realized that once I have the identity and once I have the biometric attributes of the people online, then I can provide an authentication service. So we actually added this authentication service, and that became a real game changer. So essentially, we said that we should, once you have this authentication service, then privacy becomes important. So we incorporated privacy by design, which means that whenever somebody authenticates, he'll be informed, and other kinds of things. Federated data model, which means that authentication data, the only thing which we will just have is the log of authentication, no information about the domain, which means that if you are drawing money using your authentication, then the Aadhaar system will not have any information regarding the kind of transaction you are doing, the place where you are doing from, and stuff like that. So essentially, this data relating to transaction will remain with the banks. Similarly, the data relating to giving you a mobile SIMs will remain with the mobile company. So that's how it was ensured. Then of course it was always encrypted. We used a random number. So all these principles were actually incorporated into the design to ensure that we have the privacy by design. We had, as I explained, we had technology challenges, we had political challenges. We did not have political challenges, sorry. In fact, there was a bipartisan support because people realized that if you are going to deliver services and if it is going to become easy, it will be very good. And of course, civil society challenges, we had privacy, and that finally got decided by the Honorable Supreme Court in a judgment which actually held that Aadhaar does not violate privacy, Aadhaar does not create any surveillance structure, Aadhaar does not create any profiling of the people. So that basically was settled. Now, what happened was that in 2014, the new government came to power, and the Honorable Prime Minister wanted us to have a Digital India program. So we had the Digital India program. I was fortunately the Secretary of IT at that point in time. So we sort of devised and we crafted the program. And the three pillars of that program, or three areas of that program, was: one was digital infrastructure, another was software and services, and third was citizen empowerment. And I can see that these are all the components which you require in your urban mission also. You require digital infrastructure at the base level. Then of course you require software and services on demand, and then you require citizens empowerment. So that's how we weaved it together. And then Aadhaar became a part of Digital India in some sense, because that became a part of the soft infrastructure. And on basis of that, we created a number of artifacts which are on top of Aadhaar. So one was, for example, we created Digital Locker, which was actually one of the components of Digital India, which said that we'll provide private space on a public cloud. And this is what was done. And it is again based on Aadhaar as an authentication factor. Similarly, we provided what is called digital signatures on demand, which is e-sign, which means that once you have the identity on the cloud, then you can sign any document using that identity on a demand situation. So basically you can generate the key pair which is required for a digital signature online, on demand, on the fly. So this is how the e-sign is that absolutely, nowhere in the world you have that facility of digitally signing on demand. And therefore the model became from capex to opex, and now you are having e-sign facility at the rate of 2 rupees, 3 rupees per digital signature. So that's what happened. Similarly, we had a digital consent artifact. This is also another very interesting facet which you don't have, because today when you talk of data protection laws, all of them talk of consent. Now, how do you ensure consent in a digitally, efficient manner, in a manner that it doesn't require any intervention? And that was actually digital consent artifact was notified in 2015. We also created a number of policies, which is essentially open standards, open API, and open source policy. Then in 2015, we had this JAM, Janadhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, and we realized that the trinity of the bank accounts using Janadhan program and using Aadhaar as a way to open bank account, and of course mobile as a way to communicate and to do transactions, and Aadhaar as an authentication. This thing can really change the lives, and JAM has indeed changed the lives. You are having direct benefit transfer, you have Aadhaar enabled payment systems. So basically what had happened is that we created a number of digital artifacts on top of Aadhaar, and that is actually the way we should develop any governance or any e-governance architecture today. So today we have a set of artifacts which are collectively described as India Stack, which actually ensure presence-less, paperless, and cashless governance. So for example, UPI is also exactly built on the principle of Aadhaar, which means that you describe a set of APIs, and those APIs are able to now commoditize in some sense the payment system and actually unbundle this entire thing. So unbundling is also very, very important part of this digital infrastructure. In fact, in Aadhaar, we used to have a word called AUM, AUM, and it's not a religious word in that context. A stood for asynchronous, which means that you don't need to have synchronized, or you don't need to have too many dependencies. Things must continue to work even if one particular kind of company has shut down, or one particular component or partition has shut down, the others should continue to work. And then you had unbundled, which means that you should not really solve a big horizontal problem. You should solve the components of that problem. So in a way, you have unbundled solutions, and then those can be combined using the open APIs. And the last was minimalistic. So you should have a minimalistic approach, which means that if I don't require any data, if I have to prove X is X, the only identity proof is my job, then I don't require anything more than the basic essential attributes of identity, which means the name, the gender, and the age. And of course, I require communication address. I require probably phone number if you have a phone number. I require an email address if you want to give that. And that's about all. Of course, I require biometric attributes to ensure that you are unique. So essentially, the minimalistic part also, the AUM philosophy actually guided us to ensure that we remain on course. We did not typically IT solutions start developing the function creep. Now, if I can do one thing, then I can also, do this also, I can do that also. So you keep on adding functionalities, and that becomes a mess finally, because so therefore you should be very clear as to what problem you are solving, and you should continue to focus on solving that problem. So essentially what I feel is this is the way to go about. This is the way to go about in any domain where you have what our chief architect Pramod Verma calls a Lego approach, which means that you build the Lego components, and then you kind of build a whole structure using those components. So that's basically the lesson which one can have from Aadhaar. And I think there are multiple, I'm sure multiple solutions will continue to develop. And the Digital India vision of our Honorable Prime Minister, the way it has been structured and the way actually it promotes the the triad of policies of open source, open API, and open, governance things will essentially continue to guide us to essentially ensure that we remain on course. In the urban space also, we must also realize that India, all the municipalities are at extremely different levels of development. Some of them have very sophisticated solutions. Some of them have no solutions at all. And therefore, what you need to do if you want to weave them together, and also the fact that, you have independence, you have autonomous bodies, and these autonomous bodies cannot be prescribed a particular solution. So therefore, you need to have such a component approach, which means that if you want to have this solution, I am providing a solution to you. I am providing this broad architecture of the solution to you. Please take it. And many of those guys who don't have a very well developed solutions will say, yes, we want to ride on this solution. And that is how you should not make it mandatory. You should really, start kind of promoting and incorporating people, telling them that this is something very good. So I think the digital public goods which our country has made under the Digital India program and under the, learning from Aadhaar and learning from UPI. For example, in TRAI also we proposed to the government something called WANI, which is wireless Wi-Fi access interface, network interface, which means we want to have an interoperable Wi-Fi grid in the entire country, which will actually make the connectivity much more ubiquitous than what it is today. So that is how that whole architecture, I'm sure the architecture is going to be adopted by the government. This is the kind of learning which we have from Aadhaar, and I think this learning can be applied in multiple areas. I think the broad principles are universally applicable. Some of the specifics may not be applicable to certain sectors, but then of course that is what you have eGov Foundation for. So thank you very much for inviting me to this. I have been associated or kind of interacting, not really associated formally, but interacting with Viraj and his team. And actually I must congratulate them, because the basic philosophy which I talked about, openness, interoperability, scalability, speed, all these things they are working on. It's not a profit kind of motive which actually guides them, but it is essentially a motive of creating an inclusive set of components and softwares which is going to serve the nation. Thank you very much.